My mother always stressed the importance of good manners, particularly when it came to handling finances and relationships, reminding us to act with propriety regardless of the situation. This advice has proved to be incredibly relevant in my current life. I'm 33 years old, working part-time while raising my 5-year-old daughter with my husband, Walter. We live in an apartment that's conveniently located just 2 train stops from my in-laws' house, which is near Walter's office. Walter often takes advantage of this proximity to have dinner at his parents' house without telling me, even though I stay home and prepare meals for our family. Despite numerous conversations where I've expressed my frustration, he dismisses my concerns with excuses like, "Mom made meatloaf tonight," and he never apologizes. Thankfully, my father-in-law is thoughtful enough to call and check if Walter has informed me of his plans, which helps prevent the food I make from going to waste. However, while my father-in-law shows consideration, my mother-in-law is less kind. She frequently makes undermining comments such as, "Walter just prefers my cooking," or calls to taunt me with statements like, "He's more comfortable at home. Joyce, you should make a home where your husband wants to stay." She constantly belittles me, positioning herself as superior in both homemaking and mothering skills. Moreover, she has a tendency to invade our apartment whenever she pleases, critiquing everything from my cleaning to the contents of our fridge. She has even thrown out the meals I prepared, harshly commenting, "How dare you serve Walter such terrible food? Any wife who can't manage her kitchen properly is a failure." Her intrusive behavior and harsh judgments make it challenging for Walter and me to relax and manage our household as we'd like. When I expressed my disappointment over the wasted food and suggested that I could have eaten it instead, my mother-in-law snapped back accusingly, "You're the one wasting food." Her anger flared and she began yelling, which terrified my daughter, causing her to cry. This reaction would prompt my mother-in-law to hastily exit our home, driven by her reluctance to be seen in a negative light. Her selfishness was apparent, especially in how quickly she retreated when faced with challenging situations. I tried discussing these bullying episodes with Walter, hoping for his support, but he dismissed my concerns with comments like, "You're just imagining things," or "She doesn't mean any harm." The warm and outgoing personality that had initially drawn me to Walter now seemed like a distant memory. Lately, he had become moody and dismissive, often ignoring our daughter when she attempted to engage him, significantly diminishing my view of him as a father. Things took a turn for the worse when I discovered that our daughter's education fund, to which we had been diligently contributing, was completely depleted. A staggering $62,000 had been withdrawn without my knowledge. I was certain Walter was responsible since he had access to the family account. When I confronted him, he nonchalantly stated, "Our daughter doesn't need the money right now. We can save up again when necessary." His casual disregard for our shared goals and the future we envisioned for our daughter infuriated me. "Are you serious?" I exclaimed. "How could you carelessly spend the money we saved together? It's not about needing it now. It's about preparing for when we do. What did you even spend it on?" "I helped out my mom," he replied defensively. "Most of that money came from my earnings. Got a problem with that?" I was stunned. "I contributed too," I argued. "I saved by cutting our expenses and worked hard to manage that money. Your contributions are not the only ones that matter." Our argument escalated, thankfully without disturbing our daughter. But it was clear to me then, that's it, we're getting a divorce. I couldn't believe he had taken our child's savings without discussing it with me first. Such recklessness and lack of communication were beyond unacceptable. In the heat of our argument, Walter disdainfully remarked, "Go ahead like you can survive on a part-time salary." His words left me momentarily speechless, and his smug sneer as he said, "I'm always ready for a divorce," before retreating to his room, hit me hard. Yet, instead of succumbing to tears, my resolve hardened. I refused to cry myself to sleep. Instead, I started planning for the impending divorce. A week later, my father-in-law sent me a message early in the morning. He mentioned overhearing a conversation about Walter being invited to a special dinner by my mother-in-law that very evening. True to form, Walter had not mentioned anything to me, likely planning to attend without informing me. Ever since I had voiced my decision to divorce and face belittlement for my part-time job, Walter's treatment of me had grown increasingly contemptuous. His remarks like, "I don't need to care for a dependent like you," while carelessly scattering laundry around and neglecting household cleanliness, mirrored the disdain his mother showed. His criticism of my cleaning efforts was a direct echo of his mother's nitpicking. Seeing a message from my father-in-law about the dinner felt like the right moment to act on my plans. I decided to visit the house to coincide with Walter's return from work. However, when I arrived, only Walter and my mother-in-law were there. My father-in-law had not returned home yet. They were both visibly surprised to see me. My mother-in-law scoffed, "Oh, knowing we're having sushi for dinner, you decided to freeload? How despicable." Walter chimed in with a harsh tone, "You don't deserve sushi." It was clear they had no intention of welcoming me inside. Despite the wooden front door, which wasn't very soundproof, their loud voices carried outside. As usual, they acted selfishly, completely oblivious to the feelings of those around them. I responded calmly, "I haven't received any messages about coming over for sushi. The only thing your father told me was that you were visiting your parents' house. Are you being sarcastic?" This standoff at the door highlighted just how detached and callous Walter and his mother could be, ignoring how their actions affected others. Walter accused me, his tone filled with scorn. "Because I didn't inform you? Do we need to report every move to you? It's creepy how you talk to my dad behind my back." He seemed almost convinced by his own harsh words, while my mother-in-law smirked in the background. I shot back, frustrating their mocking attitudes. "The one being creepy is you?" This made her smirk falter. "What did you say?" she snapped. "It's disgusting how you twist your father's attempts at kindness." I continued firm in my resolve. "You're just a lousy husband who fails at basic communication. Can't you see he's only trying to be considerate?" My words seemed to hit home, and Walter bit his lip, falling silent. My mother-in-law jumped to his defense. "Then you should have declined the invitation and avoided causing trouble for your dad with your brazen behavior." Her defense sounded hollow and forced. "He's arguing over there because I didn't come here to waste time with you both. Let's cut to the chase. I want a divorce," I stated plainly. "What? Really?" Walter's eyes widened in genuine shock. "You think you can manage on a part-time salary? I'm not giving up our granddaughter. You're not fit to raise her. Go apologize to Mom," he blurted, clearly rattled. Ignoring their outbursts, I calmly laid out my plan. "Starting next month, I'll be working full-time again. I used to work full-time in medical administration at the same place before we got married. When I mentioned considering a divorce to my colleagues, they encouraged me to return to full-time work. The kindergarten my daughter attends is near my workplace, so I can pick her up during my lunch break, and she can stay at the daycare until my shift ends." Anticipating their next objection, I added, "And before you argue that I can't possibly raise her on my own, I've already arranged to live with my parents." My mother-in-law looked taken aback, her earlier confidence waning. This strategic planning was my step forward, breaking away from the dysfunction and moving toward a structured and supportive environment for my daughter and me. "They're taking care of my daughter today, showering her with love and attention, something a certain husband seems to have forgotten how to do," I said pointedly, referring to my parents and contrasting their care with Walter's neglect. My mother-in-law turned to Walter, who awkwardly looked away. "Don't make jokes about this. That's unacceptable," she scolded, her voice shaking with agitation. "A father who secretly dips into the education fund poses a real threat," I asserted firmly. Just then, the front door opened and my father-in-law stepped in. "Sorry for interrupting, but can I hear more about this?" he asked, his tone serious. It seemed he had been listening from the entrance. "You used the education fund? What do you mean, Walter?" My father-in-law demanded an explanation. "It's not what it seems. Mom needed help with some renovation costs, so I helped her out." Walter tried to justify his actions. "Renovation costs?" My father-in-law looked visibly confused and turned to my mother-in-law for clarification. She quickly chimed in. Walter suggested we could all move in together. It's more cost-effective than continuing to pay rent, and if we're going to live together, renovations were necessary, she explained, revealing the plan. I was blindsided by this news. Moving in together? I haven't heard anything about that. And what about the education fund? I questioned, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden reveal. My father-in-law turned to me, seeking clarity. Joyce, can you explain what happened with the money Walter withdrew? You mentioned getting a divorce? I laid it all out for my father-in-law about the unauthorized withdrawal and our impending divorce. Then you should just leave the granddaughter here. I'll take care of her, my mother-in-law interjected, her voice trembling with a mix of defiance and desperation. No, I replied, steadying my voice. This decision was made by my husband, and I can't just ignore a promise made between spouses. The tension in the air was palpable as family dynamics and financial disputes intertwined, making the conversation increasingly complex and fraught with emotional stakes. As the conversation turned tense, I found myself questioning, I don't remember agreeing to anything like that. I reached into my bag and pulled out a file, laying it on the table in front of everyone. This is the pledge we made concerning the education fund, I explained, spreading the documents out for them to see. Given Walter's previous carelessness, I documented our agreement. My mother always advised documenting everything related to money. I pointed to a signature on the document. Walter's signature is here, I highlighted. My father-in-law, looking over the document, seemed impressed by the foresight. What? Why is this here? Walter stammered, clearly panicking, likely because he had signed it without fully understanding the implications. The terms of the agreement are clear, I continued. If the education funds were used for anything other than their intended purpose, it would trigger an immediate option for divorce. Moreover, in such a case, custody of any children involved would default to the other parent. If Walter couldn't comply with these terms, he would be required to pay back twice the amount taken from the fund. Essentially, Walter would risk losing custody and owing me $90,000, which could support my case in divorce mediation. I have gathered ample evidence of both your usual behavior and your mother's treatment of me, I added with a slight smile, so you can imagine who will likely gain custody in mediation. My words left my husband gasping in disbelief while my father-in-law let out a heavy sigh and turned to my mother-in-law. For now, return the money Walter gave you. You haven't started the renovations yet, so the money should still be there, he instructed sternly. Upon hearing this, my husband's face momentarily brightened, likely thinking that returning the funds might prevent the divorce. However, facing his hopeful expression, my mother-in-law turned pale and shook her head. It's gone. I've already spent it, she admitted in a weak voice, causing a ripple of gasps around the room. What? My mother-in-law trembled, her usual composure dissolving as she fell silent, revealing the depth of her misstep. And some clothes, too. I only meant to borrow them, but I couldn't resist, she confessed. I was speechless at her admission, but my father-in-law was quick to react. This is ridiculous. What were you thinking? But Walter said we could save up again for our granddaughter's education fund, so I thought it would be okay, she tried to defend her actions. You knew it was meant for our daughter's education and still spent it. How can you possibly justify that? You won't hand over our granddaughter. Who's truly despicable here? I argued, my anger boiling over, my tone colder than I intended. My mother-in-law stared at me, stunned by the confrontation. I'm sorry, but I no longer want to be part of this family, I declared firmly. They're nothing but toxic to our precious granddaughter. At these words, my mother-in-law broke down in tears. Following this fallout, I proceeded with the divorce from Walter. Armed with evidence of his mistreatment and the breached pledge, the divorce proceedings regarding child support and property division went in my favor. The education fund, which I had contributed to significantly, totaling $75,000, was rightfully restored to me. My ex-husband struggled to come up with the money, To meet her part of the repayment, my mother-in-law was forced to sell all her designer goods and jewelry. The remaining amount was covered by my father-in-law, who had always tried to act in our best interests. Walter and his mother tried to blame him, arguing that helping your wife is a husband's duty. However, this only enraged him further, and he severed ties with both of them. In a final twist, my ex-husband even considered moving in with his mother, attempting to maintain some semblance of family after the split. This entire ordeal highlighted the complexities and deep-seated issues within the family, ultimately leading to a necessary but painful separation. After he failed to deliver on a project at work which resulted in a demotion and a pay cut, they found themselves unable to afford the rent for their apartment and were forced to move to a smaller place. To gather the necessary funds, they had to cancel their life insurance policies and use the cash from those policies to cover their debts. When he reported the completed payment and shared his struggles, seeking perhaps a bit of sympathy, I only offered a detached "aha" and moved on from the conversation. His frustration boiled over during our phone call when he exclaimed, "Don't you have any words of gratitude?" To which I replied, "No, I have my issues, so perhaps I should start charging you for them." With that, he went silent, and I ended the call and soon after updated my contact details to ensure it was the last I heard from him. Later, I learned from my mother-in-law that she had suggested reconciling with my father-in-law, but he flatly refused. Their financial situation was dire. Their spending habits hadn't changed, and their finances were a mess. This once close-knit family now found themselves frequently arguing, each blaming the other for their ongoing financial woes. During one of their spats, my father-in-law sarcastically remarked, "Ah, your beloved son, isn't he?" To which my mother-in-law bitterly responded, "He's nothing but a frustrating money pit." These incidents underline the importance of being upfront about financial matters, whether dealing with parents, children, or spouses. Reflecting on my mother's advice, I felt a profound sense of validation for her wisdom.